In this chapter, we'll be talking about current issues in civil liberties, focusing on a balancing act between liberty and security, an issue that is clearly in the news these days. First, let's start with talking about what civil liberties are versus civil rights. That sometimes these terms are used interchangeably, but there is a difference. That civil liberties, basically limitations on government. They specify what government cannot do. Civil rights specify what government must do to ensure equal protection and freedom from discrimination. We'll talk more about civil rights in next week's lecture. Here are some examples of civil liberties: freedom of speech, right to privacy, right to be free from unreasonable searches of your home, right to a fair court trial, the right to marry, and the right to vote. And the core question, as we talked about just a second ago, is it justifiable to violate certain civil liberties in the name of security? We'll look at that question through these current issues in civil liberties: the NSA surveillance, stop and frisk policy, and criminal prosecutions. Before we talk about the NSA surveillance, let's spend just a second talking about the right to privacy. There's no explicit constitutional right to privacy, but it is an interpretation by the Supreme Court, with the basis being the First, Third, Fourth, Fifth, and Ninth Amendments, and also the ruling in Griswold versus Connecticut, in which the court ruled that prohibiting the use of contraceptives violated the right to privacy. Now let's talk about NSA surveillance. Patriot Act allows the government to be able to obtain phone records of millions of Americans. This program began after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, but really wasn't very widely known until later in that decade. Part of surveillance is the PRISM program, where the government can collect more than 200 million internet communications a year, and those are communications through Facebook, Google, Yahoo, and YouTube. Now let's talk about security versus privacy and some of the overarching issues. The security interest with this type of surveillance program is the people who support it say the programs don't monitor the content of phone calls and emails. They only access the metadata. That's the information about when call, email, or online chat began, how long it lasted, and possibly a general location of parties involved. The people favoring this program also say it enables agencies to prevent terrorist attacks and also can play a significant role in tracing the sequence of events and revealing terrorists involved after an attack has taken place. On the privacy side, a couple of questions. Is privacy invaded as soon as the NSA stores or gains access to that data? That simply storing that personal information is an invasion of privacy. And another question, is privacy invaded when the NSA actually data mines the communication? A recent poll on this issue showed some interesting results that appears that when it comes to civil liberties and the war on terrorism, Americans want the best of both worlds. On one hand, by a 20-point margin, Americans say it's more important for the government to protect the rights and freedoms of citizens than to keep the public safe from terrorism. But by an equal margin, they also say it sometimes is necessary to sacrifice rights and freedoms in order to stop terrorists. So you see it cutting both ways. Other poll results show that this program is impacting how Americans look at what the government's doing. Today, 34% believe government does a good job of protecting privacy, down from 40% 2 years ago. 53% think government does a good job of ensuring freedoms, down from 60% 2 years ago. 71% don't want officials eavesdropping on U.S. phone calls without court warrants. And 62% oppose collection of the contents of Americans' emails without warrants. Now let's move on to the stop and frisk policy. The most widely known is New York City's policy on stop and frisk. That's really widely credited in reducing murders and major crimes to historic lows in the city. But in August 2013, a federal judge ruled the policy unconstitutional, said it was widespread disregard for the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures by the government, as well as the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. And they noted that 83% of stops under the program between 2004 and 2013 involved Hispanics and blacks, slightly more than 50% of the cities, who make up slightly more than 50% of the city's population. So you can see that it's out of proportion with the number of stops versus the city population. Judge called it the policy of indirect racial profiling by increasing the number of stops in minority communities, and also said the police were too quick to deem suspicious behavior that was perfectly innocent. Let's talk about another balancing act, the rights of the accused versus the rights of society. It's important to remember to start that if the government accuses an individual of committing a crime, the individual is presumed to be innocent until proven guilty. The accused is allowed specific rights and may be set free on a legal technicality related to their violation. The Bill of Rights, specifically the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments, sets forth specific rights of criminal defendants. As part of the Balancing Act, due process and fair treatment for all. There are certain rights of the accused. That the accused have the rights of limits on the conduct of police officers and prosecutors. There should be no unreasonable or unwarranted searches or seizures, no arrest except on probable cause, no entrapment, those sorts of things. The defendants have pretrial rights, prompt arraignment, legal counsel, reasonable bail, to be informed of charges, and the right to remain silent. They also have trial rights, speedy and a public jury trial, an impartial jury representing a cross-section of the community, a trial atmosphere that's free of prejudice, fear, and outside interference, adequate counsel, those sorts of things. Also, rights of the accused were extended. Gideon versus Wainwright, that's what provided a right to an attorney if the accused cannot find one. And in the Miranda case, that's the ruling that police must inform suspects at the time of their arrest of their right to remain silent and right to an attorney. And that's the Miranda warning that's very familiar. In 1991, court ruled that the coerced or illegally obtained confessions do not necessarily need to bar a conviction if other evidence is strong. And just recently, federal court ruled that a Miranda warning given in both English and Spanish to a Spanish-speaking suspect is insufficient if a police officer's translation fails to convey the true meaning of the arrested person's rights. So a Spanish speaker needs to understand clearly what his or her rights are. Another part of the Balancing Act, exclusionary rule. That prohibits admission at trial of illegally seized evidence, and that includes evidence in violation of Miranda rights. And some exceptions have recently been created by the courts. For example, when evidence would have been acquired anyway, or when an arrest is made in good faith. So that's just a very quick look at 3 issues that revolve around this question of security versus liberty. With that, we're going to move on with some of the concepts for your quiz. You should understand what civil liberties are, when the Bill of Rights began to be applied to the states, the ruling of Lemon versus Kurtzman, understand the Flag Protection Act of 1989, what's the definition of obscenity, what's the main similarity between the Communications Decency Act of 1996 and the Children's Online Protection Act of 1998. You also should know, under Roe versus Wade, what restrictions may a state place on abortions. Understand the Webster versus Reproductive Health Services ruling. Know what the U.S. Patriot Act made it easier for the government to do, and what the exclusionary rule is. The answers to these concepts and the information that you're going to need for the quiz will all be in your textbook, and you also should be reviewing the PowerPoint slides that are under the course documents. Good luck.